So Shakespeare has moved into modern culture and into popular culture in this way. So we would encourage you to experience your Shakespeare, our Shakespeare. The Germans used to say unser Shakespeare. Shakespeare as a initially German writer. You should make Shakespeare your own. And in fact, the very beginning of this book of mine, this Shakespeare After All, begins by claiming that we all create, every age creates its own Shakespeare. That Shakespeare is like a mirror or like a portrait whose eyes follow you around the room, that people recognize themselves in Shakespearean characters and situations and phrases, that we think through Shakespeare, that we use the phrases that we encounter in these plays to express the situations of common life, and that Shakespeare is already inside us, whether you have ever studied Shakespeare formally or informally. Before you will come upon things. There's a famous story about a probably apocryphal story about a woman who went to the theater and saw a production of Hamlet and walked out at the interval and said that it was all made of quotations, and that's because supposedly she had encountered it as as sets of quotes beforehand. But I think that you'll find even in the plays with which you may be less familiar that that's where that comes from. Let me think what would be a Lord, I'm trying to think of a line from Troilus and Cressida that would function in this way, and I had one on the tip of my tongue. I'll think of one. But anyway, you'll find that there are lines that function precisely in this way. So this course is a completely self-contained one. You need not have read the earlier plays of Shakespeare in order to read these. I teach the plays as early and late by preference, rather than by genre, rather than by teaching a course on the comedies and the histories, or the tragedies or the romances, because it's so interesting to me to see what the playwright and his company seem to have been doing and engaging at a given moment in time, that echoes from play to play at a given time period seem to me absolutely as interesting as anything that we could say was determined by genre. And I'll say some things in just a second about these Shakespearean genres and the degree to which they do or don't actually function. But first, if you'll just have a look with me at the syllabus, I just want to indicate to you something about what it is that we are doing, and then I'll say something about what this actually contains. So today we're going to talk in general about Shakespeare, about his times, about the start point really of these so-called later plays, about in the second half of this time period we'll look closely at a couple of passages in order to come to grips with Shakespearean language and see how rich it is. And then we plunge into Troilus and Cressida and Measure for Measure. Again, let me take a kind of census here. How many of you have read or seen Troilus and Cressida recently, in the last 5 years? Great, okay. Measure for Measure. Fantastic, okay. Othello. Because by the time we get to Othello, we're getting to the plays that for a long time in the last century, the 20th century, were thought of as, the great tragedies of Shakespeare. Othello, King Lear, Hamlet, Macbeth. Hamlet is written in 1599, 1600, and does not fall into the later plays category. We'll be talking about Hamlet from time to time. But these other plays, the great tragedies, so-called, became the centerpiece of the study of Shakespeare, really partly as a result of the famous Oxford lectures of the critic A.C. Bradley, who thought of these as Shakespeare's mature tragedies, and the Bradley plays, so-called, became, for the 20th century, the kind of measures of Shakespearean greatness. And I just want to say, as a kind of parenthesis around this, that there have been times in the history, the long history of Shakespearean reception, when the comedies were thought of as more important than the tragedies, when the romances, which are the latest plays that we'll come to in a moment and that will come at the end of our semester, were thought of as the culmination of his work, that the different kinds of plays that Shakespeare writes have been valued by different time periods and different places at different levels, so that we should not automatically assume because we are ourselves the heirs of the 20th century, that these great central tragedies are the